Hi everybody, Dr. Pringle here. I'm working on a terrain map of Colorado, and I have a student who has noted that when using something like shaded relief, which is a fairly pretty way to look at the terrain, generates a nice looking map much of the time, combines a hypsometric tint with some shading. Um, you get the legend value that goes from 0 to 255, and so we wondered how best to deal with this. My response was, don't use shaded relief as your primary symbology. There are other ways to do this, and I'll show you one. So if we go back into stretch, we can then apply sort of half of what's going on with the shaded relief first. So we'll use just a simple color map here. We're going to go and choose a terrain layer that seems to make sense. I'll choose this one. Whether or not this is what I would go with is maybe debatable. But when you do this, you then get a legend that matches the global data set. So I'm pulling this as the terrain layer from the Living Atlas. And so we've got quite a range of elevations here. I'm focused in on Colorado, which you can't really tell. But these values aren't really what I would want on my legend either, and this isn't applying the coloration according to the local area. So we're certainly going to want to do something like a dynamic range adjustment to focus that color map here, in this case automatically, to get something that is more or less reasonable. So here we've got a maximum and minimum, 823 to 4228. Now, the part that we're missing here is the shading. So if we go back into our map and we add some data, we can go back into the Living Atlas. And I'm going to add two separate layers here. I'm going to look at terrain, and the two layers that I want are a hillshade and a multi-directional hillshade. And I'm actually going to bring in slope in degrees for another way to do this. All right, we'll make these smaller for now. And I'm going to turn off slope in degrees, and I'm actually going to turn off hillshade as well. All right, and I have my terrain hillshade. Now what we want to do is apply a layer blending of multiplication. And what this is going to do is sort of make this semi-transparent, but in a much better way than if we're using transparency. So depending on the lightness of that layer, we get a different kind of transparency, and the whole thing ends up looking quite a bit better. And we still have the ability to sort of include this in our legend for our final map. This looks fine, and a lot of people would stop there. I'll say that you can, if you start adjusting the gamma, you can get some different values in here. I'm going to add a multi-directional hillshade, and I'm going to need to do the same layer blending to make this work. And what you get is, I think, just a little bit more depth. And I'm not the first person to argue this, but combining both of these layers together sort of gets the best of both worlds. One of the things that you can do when you're here is to apply a little bit of gamma on this if you're not satisfied with it. So I tend to like a good bit of vertical exaggeration in my elevation maps, of course, depending on the scale and extent that I'm working with. But if we go to stretch, we can, instead of using the color scheme that comes with this, we can make some modifications here. So to adjust the gamma on this, I'm going to set this maybe to 0.5 and try to bring out just a little bit more detail here yet. Now, this may be too much for you, and you'll find the sweet spot of whatever looks good to you for whatever it is that you're mapping. But changing these around a little bit to sort of get the exact kind of layer that you want is I think really what's going on with the shaded relief that's incorporated in the basic symbology here. So it doesn't take much to sort of add that extra layer in there. and I think it's a pretty good result. One of the things that I do quite like, so I'm going to turn these off for just a second, and I'm going to turn on the slope in degrees. I like to use slope as a way to shade this as well. So one of the things that you'll almost certainly want to, this is a neat sort of an X-ray view, if you will, but if you invert the colors so that steeper is darker, you get a reasonable approximation of what a multi-directional hill shade looks like anyway. And if you simply peg the maximum and minimum here to something a little bit more reasonable, you can get a pretty good approximation. So one of the things that you can do, for instance, is instead of having this go to 90 degrees, have it go to 45 degrees. And now the deepest black kind of maps to that, and a flat slope maps to white. And then we can, of course, turn on our layer blending for this as well. And the difference between this and a multi-directional shading is fairly subtle. And maybe you want to blend all three of these things together. Maybe you want to try to enhance this a little bit more by playing around with the gamma here. Lots of easy options to sort of dial in this to get exactly what you want. I do really love that shaded relief is there. It's really quite useful. Actually, we want to invert this a little bit here. It's super useful. And yet I do like the ability to kind of change around each layer, both cartographically speaking, clearly this is too much, cartographically speaking, but also because this legend is really important. Now, if you want to play around with this a little bit further, you could spike this to kind of whatever it is that that you want. So instead of negative 450 to 870. You can kind of look at the DRA to get a good sense of what a good number is likely to be. There is, in fact, a bug in ArcGIS kind of right at the moment where DRA is not sort of showing up correctly in a legend. So if I go over to my layout and I insert a legend, I wind up with this same sort of negative 450 to 870. And it's not easy to get it to obey the actual range that we're looking at. So if we go in here to custom, and we'll just kind of try to remember this is about, let's call it 825 to 4225. I'll never remember that, so let's just take a picture. And we change this to custom. 825 to 4225, let's say. We get roughly the same values that we had before, cartographically speaking, a couple meters here or there for the scope of Colorado. Doesn't really matter too much. And we come back into the layout, and now we are obeying that limit. So of course, you dial the rest of this in a little bit further as well. But there's a quick sort of process at approximating. I'm going to set this back to something a little nicer. There we get a pretty good approximation of what we wanted to do with shaded relief, and yet have the flexibility and have the legend sort of show in the way we want it. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.